So today we're going to cover again the flex shaft mandrels and how you're going to use them to clean up solder. I do have to say that I always use a file first, and if a file doesn't work for what I need, like getting into certain places, then I will work over and use the flex shaft tools. The problem with the flex shaft tools is they make everything look like jelly beans. So if you're somebody who really likes hard, sharp, clean edges, then the flex shaft, you need to practice with your solder samples not to make everything round. But we've got our solder samples here that we've done, the first three, the butt joint, the right angle, and the sweat solder. And I just want to talk about cleaning it up. With this one here, you can use the flex shaft that's a disc, and this is a Kratex wheel. And the Kratex wheels are made out of rubber, and then they're impregnated with different grits. So I pulled out the different grits here for you to look at. Some of them are marked, some of them are not. But you can see that the fine grit is much, much smaller than the coarse grit that's on here. And so I'm kind of one of those people, if I'm gonna work on something, I would prefer to start with the finest, because if the finest works for me, then I don't have to go back from the medium to fine. I can then just go right to the polishing machine. So what I want to show you is the way that these mandrels work is that you unscrew them. And a lot of times students get lazy and they don't want to switch this, and they put it on this cone mandrel. And that is always problematic because you're going to poke a hole through the other side and you're going to scratch up your metal. So all the wheels are used on this mandrel and tighten it up. The other thing I just want to share with you is we do have these knife edge discs that are really nice to work with. And then also this is a polishing one. It's totally smooth, so it's for a final finish. So the sanding discs, we should actually take a picture of in the back there where we've got a chart for you. But I'm going to put on the fine because I think I should be able to get the solder off of this. And the fine is something like probably 320 sandpaper. So then I can go right to 400 and then go right to the polishing machine. If I started with the coarse, I would then have to go to the medium and then the fine before I went to the polishing machine. So I always try to use the least invasive first. And if that works, I've saved myself some time. Okay, so I'm gonna sit down with the flex shaft. I've got my hair pulled back. I'm gonna go ahead and use this 3-jaw chuck, just like you guys do for drilling.
You definitely want to have your N95 mask for this.
Yes, N95 masks on at all times. So I'm going to tighten that down. And one of the things I do want to share with you is that you can actually shape these wheels. You can put it on the sandpaper and reshape it if I wanted to change the angle of them. This one's not really round. We'll see how it goes. But what I want to show you is I'm going to come in and I'm going to start working where the solder is. And I'm going to just target the solder joint and try to remove that extra solder. You notice that I'm not just holding it in one place, because now I have a groove in there that's never going to come out. So what I like to do is I like to keep my tool moving beyond just where the solder is. I can focus where the lump is, and then once it looks like the solder's gone, then I want to feather it out. And you can see, even with trying to feather this, I've got a little bit of hills and valleys on there. And now I'm going to come back along here. But it didn't take too terribly long with this fine wheel to clean up this excess solder along the edge there. Okay. And then I'm going to flip it over and just run along the back here. So let me show you again what happens if I put this on this edge and I grind. I've got little grooves there. Maybe those don't show much, But watch what happens when I use my sandpaper over the top of it. I've got divots. That said, you could use these to actually put a texture on a piece of metal that's there. I'm going to flip it over on the other side. I'm going to sand right where I did that other one, and you can see. And then I'm going to sand with the 400 sandpaper just to make sure I don't have any grooves from the flex shaft. How's that looking, Aaron, on the camera?
Pretty good.
Yeah, you can see that there's still little divots there. But if you feather it out, and what I mean by feathering is go in, I can even try to feather this out, get it running, and then I'm going to try to and then when I go back in with the sandpaper, nope, I still have to go back in and feather it even more, but you can see that it is getting smaller. So I'm working around the outside of what I'm going to call a cavity. And then go back in with sandpaper. And so you can see that it's going to take me a long time to fix that, but it is getting smaller that's on there. Okay, so these work really well on flat surfaces. I can come in. Normally I do it down here, but I'm finding that the students were then Scotch-Briting all over that. So hold it in your hand, target your solder area, because that was a big chunk of solder that climbed up on top. But don't just work in one spot. And sometimes it's hard to see the color difference when you're doing this. Like I can still see a little bit of silver solder there. It's going to take a little longer off, but you can also see I can just run right along that edge. And I would recommend that you play with your samples, and you can actually even texture with these and make designs and patterns with them. You can see that that's a piece of scrap, so it's got that big scar in it. But okay. And then the next one I want to share is the cone. And the cone one, wasn't it just right there? Oh, there it is. The cone one, it threads off and on like this. And what happens is people will they're too lazy, and they'll take and put this on there. Then they'll come over and they'll start grinding, and they will scratch with that. So this is not designed for the wheels. It's designed for these bullet shapes. And the bullet shapes come in the different coarsenesses too. And if you're finding you're having a hard time holding on to that, where's mine? I'll just have to use them. Oh yeah, these flat nose pliers, just like this, and then you can thread it down on. And so then you've got something like a pencil, which is helpful to get into inside curves. And oops, one of the things that I have in my studio is I have all my mandrels the same diameter. Here in the studio over the years, things have been given to us, and they're all different sizes, but when you're working in production, it's really nice to have them all the same size, and then it's easier to get them off and on. But this one too can come in, and you can start cleaning up and targeting. I really use these more for getting into an inside curve. So I've got this piece here, and I just want to clean up in the inside here. And just practice texturing your metal with it and giving it a nice pattern and clean. But you can see how nice it got into that inside curve. Another place that's going to be really helpful is that you're going to forget and put solder on the inside of a curve, and then you're going to have to go in and clean it up. And this tool works really well for that. You can see. But it too can leave a groove in it. The other thing I just want to share with you is as this starts to wear out, I usually use 220 sandpaper and I'll resharpen my point. I have had students take their file and sharpen it, and what happens is it wipes off all the teeth on the file. So if you're gonna reshape your Kratex wheels, make sure that you only use sandpaper. And then that's gonna allow me to get back in to a small area and clean up my excess solder. So I am targeting the solder area, but I'm also feathering it out, meaning I'm going out farther so there's not a deep groove there, like that. So this would work really well if I needed to get down inside a tube also. So I'm going to show you the one that I didn't learn about when I was in school, and I asked my professor about it afterwards, and he said, oh, if you don't use it right, you can damage your piece really easily. But this is what's called a snap-on sanding disc, and it comes with a little square head on it, and it snaps right underneath here. So a lot of times there's a gap in between the two sides, and that's what allows the pressure to stay on. And so I can snap it on that way, or I can take it off and I can turn around and snap it that way. If you use this edge, you're gonna cut grooves into it, and that's gonna be problematic. But for here, what's nice about it is I can come in, and when I work with the flex shaft, it reminds me of my grandmother showing me how to core apples and stuff, is I have my two fingers or two hands attached to each other somehow, just to keep the stability there. And then I'm coming in nice and parallel to the edge of the metal, and it's gonna go right down and clean up all the way down to that seam. If I do this, I now have a groove in it that I'm not going to be able to get out. So you can see that I'm working pretty parallel to the upright part of this. And then I can turn it around and I can just run it right along here. Couldn't get in farther, right? So that's when I'll take it, snap it off, turn it over, and then I got to rearrange my hand here so you can see it, and then I'll come in and I'm able, and I'm looking really awkward here because I'm trying to make sure that everyone's getting a full view of it. Okay. So that's going to get in and clean up in close. And then with this one here, I can come along and you can see that I can get the stuff on the outside of the curve taken care of, but the inside curve not gonna fit in there. But what I'd like you guys all to do is get your solder seams correct, meaning they're soldered all the way down, and then use the flex shaft tool to learn how to operate it. So able to go in and clean up my excess solder. You're always going to have a little bit of a shadow. And then what our job will be is to show you how to make sure that you're making the piece really precise and clean. But that's cleaning that up pretty good. Another tool that I want to share with you is the bristle brush ones. And these come in many different sizes and textures for coarseness. I don't have them at the benches because if you put them on the wrong way, you'll just rip all these off, but you notice how it's catching it that way. These are fabulous for hills and valleys. So for me to get in and around these little bumps that I've made here, see how it'll fit in between and it'll clean up around and get into an area that has hills and valleys on it. And they're really useful for getting into areas that you can't get into. I usually put my hand like this and go, if I If I have this, it's just going to go across the top and not get into the low spots. But with this is going to come in and it's going to actually go into the low spots as well. It's on there. So those are called bristle discs. And then another one I want to share with you is a Mizzy wheel. And the Mizzy wheel is a stone. And when you look at it, it looks like a stone. It's not really designed for removing solder, but you can use it for texture. And can you hear the sound? It's so much different. But it's going to give you a texture that you may or may not like. The other thing I should just say is that usually I use this part of the wheel. You can use this part of the wheel. You just have to be careful not to scratch your metal with this right there. But you can see that it gives you two different kinds of textures. I had a student who made a hollow project, and it was a sand dollar. And on the underside of the sand dollar, there's a kind of the leaf feather thing. She used this Mizzy wheel to actually make that part. So it's kind of fun to see what people can do with the Mizzy wheels for texture. And then if you've got a lot of material to remove, remove it, but I usually don't use those for soldering. And the last one that I'm not going to actually talk about today is, this is what's called a flap wheel. And it's really good for cleaning up the insides of a ring, and actually I can do that. So it's got a split down the middle, so that's why it's called a split mandrel. And what I'm going to do is take some sandpaper. This is 400, so it's pretty fine. And I'm going to tear the piece off. The way that I tear that is you notice I folded it up and then I really scored it with my fingernail so that when I tear it, I don't use scissors on my paper because it dulls them. And then what I need to do is I need to, and it's, being dyslexic is always interesting, I need to wrap this around the mandrel like this. And the paper doesn't have to be that long, but, and then I need to put it into the flex shaft. Need to tighten it down. And then the reason why I call it a flap wheel is the sound. Put it inside. And then it goes around and around. And it'll clean up the inside of your ring really easily. Oops, it just fell off. What I like about, and I don't even know where, oh, there it is. What I like about this is then as it wears down, I can take a little bit more off. I can put this back on, and then I can go back in and work. But you can see that it works really well in cleaning up the inside of something. Doesn't work as well on the outside. I'll show you that. But I didn't know about these until I took a class from Megan Corwin. And it was actually a chasing and repoussé class, but she turned me on to these. But fits inside. As I wear down the sandpaper, I just take that sandpaper off. So when I want to use the outside, you can still use it. It's just a little bit more tricky. It wants to open up on you there. Okay, so this is going to be really helpful when you guys do your band rings. And once again, I'm using 400 sandpaper because if it does the job, I don't have to then, if I'd used 220 sandpaper, I would have had to then use 320 and then 400 that's on there. So okay. There's so many other tools and attachments for flex shafts, but this should get you going on learning how to clean up your solder joints. And I do want everybody to make a divot or two so that you know that how that happens and not to have it happen on a piece that's important to you. And then once again, we'll take a picture and post the chart that's on the back by the pickle pots that shows you all the different types of attachments that you can use on the flex shaft. Just remember not to use the Kratex wheels to sharpen them on a file, otherwise you've just ruined a $20 file. Okay,